Restorers, if you're using Xactimate, you need the live estimating guidance of the actual Xactimate profile. It guides your scope as you write it and reminds you of relevant line items you should be including in real time. The result? Accurate, well-justified estimates, reducing friction and maximizing efficiency. No more mistakes, no more missed line items. Try the actionable profile today and get 99% off your first month. Visit getinsights.org for more info.
Hey Restorers, welcome to another market update. I am very excited to have Aaron Brunko and David Obert with Verisk Property Estimating Solutions with me. Aaron is the president and David is chief product officer, and we love doing market updates once in a while. So we are here recording this the beginning of March, so you'll be hearing this within a few weeks of when we record it, to talk about where the industry's at. Verisk has a plethora of data, so I can't think of really anybody better to have on the podcast once in a while to share updates on where the industry's at. I know a lot of the industry is feeling hopeful that 2025 is going to be better than 2024. I know a lot of people were feeling pretty squeezed last year, and the storms at the end of the year did help. Now we do have the wildfires at the beginning of this year, but kind of curious where things are shaking out. So Aaron and Dave, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to have you back. As always, I'm going to toss it over to both of you to just quickly introduce yourselves for people who have not maybe heard the podcast before. So Aaron, I'm going to toss it to you first.
Okay. Yep. Hi. Thanks for having us back on again. Aaron Brunko. I'm the president of what we call PES, or I can't get it out of my head. It's still Xactware family of products. And just happy to be here again with you. And hopefully we can share some information that'll be helpful.
Perfect. All right, Dave.
Yeah, David Obert, Chief Product Officer in Property Estimating Solutions, aka Xactware, like Aaron said. And just like Aaron, super excited to get to hang out with you again, Michelle. It's always one of my favorite things to do. Let me tell you.
Even when we're at a conference together and
even when we're at a conference together, we don't get to connect.
I don't know how that happens.
I don't know how that happened either.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. How did 2024 finish out? We haven't kind of really chatted since then. So how did 2024 finish out in comparison to maybe previous years? I don't know who of you wants to take it, but go for it.
Sure. Dave, if you want to jump into it,
yeah, sure. Happy to. Yeah. So 2024 was an interesting year where we had kind of this back end of activity. It kind of, hurricane activity kind of brought us to more normal levels than what we saw. And there was a lot of belief around what hurricane season was going to look like. And we talked about this last time, Michelle. There was a significant perception and belief that we were going to have just an out of control hurricane season. Like we were going to have 22 different hurricane events. And it was just, a bunch of these were going to make landfall, and it was just going to be absolute pandemonium, end of the world type stuff. Well, that's not what we actually saw. What we actually saw was pretty in line with what's average for over the course of the last five or so years. It was just a very average year. Now we did have some uniqueness happen with Helene and Milton, but generally it wasn't as impactful as we thought we would have. And it was a relatively quiet severe convective storm season at the first half of the year, and it was a pretty quiet, January, February, first quarter was pretty quiet. But it was kind of more muted and more in line with what we would traditionally see.
Yep. Do you either think that us as an industry rely too much on hurricane season? I think we're going to get a little bit more into this as the conversation goes, but there's always so much talk about cat season, hurricane season's coming, it's coming, and maybe this is going to make up for the rest of the year, and we haven't done well, and there just hasn't been claim volume, whatever that may be. So I'm curious your take on, does the industry maybe rely a little bit too much on hurricane season?
I don't know. What do you think, Aaron?
Yeah, I think so, but I also think it's a combination because when you run into hurricane season, you also have challenges with coverage, right? Whether it was flood, whether it was truly hurricane, wind, right? So you get these nuances, and we saw that play out with both Helene and Milton. They created some challenges that will continue to be throughout Florida and then also into the Carolinas. I do think that there is a strong reliance on it. And I think it's also a good thing too, because it's also resources that devote their time and effort to helping restore those communities. So while we call it an over-reliance, I would say it is the supply meeting the demand. from the standpoint of helping business owners and homeowners essentially get made whole again, which is our promise to the industry, right?
Yep.
Collective.
Yes.
So yes, but it's a good thing. And then there's obviously you have to load balance with your daily. And that's, kind of a challenging thing for a lot of companies to do is to, chase the storms and then come back to normalization for daily.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
my view. I don't know, Dave. What do you think?
Well, I don't want to discount because I think we often discount too much the hail season. Like hail season, I think is often discounted. We're so focused on,
Mhm.
oh, we got to worry about those hurricanes hitting, and we got to worry about hurricane season hitting in July, August timeframe. The reality is, leading up until then, we have this storm season that exists that people forget. I mean, all the hell events that we run into, if we look at 2024 compared to previous years, we are consistently seeing an increase in severe convective storm activity, whether that's through derechos, whether that's through hail events, whether that's through whatever. But we are seeing a consistent increase in hail events, is what we're traditionally hail and wind events,
Mhm.
more in the Midwest region. And so 2024, we saw a couple decent sized hail events that happened in 2024. Certainly Colorado got pummeled. I can't forget that. And we're seeing this kind of shift happen as well as we start seeing, and I'll call it shift left. It's more shift east, of some of these storms. And if you do the comparisons, with population growth, and you start thinking about some of these different factors associated with severe convective storm, you realize that there's actually quite a bit of volume that comes from that I think, restorers have to think about. It's not just about hurricane season. There are other seasons that exist that you should be thinking about, whether that's freezes or hail or wind, or there's a number of different things that you have to kind of keep your finger on the pulse of, so that your business continues to grow. So maybe just to add to what Aaron's saying, I think it's a healthy reliance, certainly, because we want to make people whole. But there's this entire different swath of folks that need help, that I think we forget about sometimes.
Mhm. So how are you seeing contractors diversify so that they can stay, ahead on claims volume, continue getting claims volume without being fully reliant on maybe, hurricane season or whatever that may be? What are some verticals maybe that you're seeing restorers expanding into that's helping them make sure that they have streams of income coming no matter what? Aaron, I'll toss that one to you first.
Yeah. So as we're talking about it, I think roofing is a pretty strong opportunity where you will see both roll-ups of roofing companies at this point. We're starting to see that play out. But then also, I think as companies look to expand and normalize, it's that careful balance between resi and commercial. And so we're seeing companies that chase both. And then you'll see companies that specialize, like environmental. And I think those are some of the ways that they, uh, let's call it, diversify their business, so that when you have peaks and valleys in certain perils, you are able to ride the wave, but then not completely get crashed by it later on. And that's what we see is, companies that specialize either in mitigation or repair for the recon side. They're saying, what is going on? We're not getting any claims. Whereas like roofers, right, we're saying we actually have more assignments than we have before. And some of those are going to be tied to those types of perils. So I would categorize it as some of the other trades as opportunities, commercial versus residential, and then some of the other specialized niches, if you will.
Yeah, 100%. I think that one thing that sticks in my mind, there's a necessity in the construction market, and this is more broad, right? But in the
Mhm.
construction market, there's a necessity for 500,000 new entrants into the space. We know that there's a huge amount of opportunity across construction, whether that's new construction, remodel, or renovations, or restoration. It's all, one big market effectively. You certainly have different specialties, but there's a massive amount of opportunity. There's no question. You just have to look and find where that is.
And when you said the 500,000, you're referring to laborers, right?
Laborers. That's right. Yep. You got it. 500,000 laborers. Thank you, Aaron. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't say that.
As the new entrants in the market as an opportunity. And I think that's also an area of opportunity. It's something, Dave, you and I talked about when we went to Middle State, Tennessee, the construction program,
Hmm.
and trying to get more people inbound into the restoration industry, I think is something that we all collectively can do a better job of.
Yeah,
Yes.
100%.
Yeah.
And we've heard, I mean, I was talking to a restorer and he mentioned to me, he said, I have two options. I can bring in somebody that can either muck out, a flooded basement, and that's disgusting, or in some places can go to work for McDonald's. Which one am I gonna like? Which one are
Yep.
they gonna choose? We got to make sure that we're bringing the right people into the market, no question. So to your point, Aaron, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity, and we want to make sure that we're bringing the right people into the market so that we can do better work, no question.
Yes, 100%. We could do an entire podcast or several on that topic alone. That is a huge, huge topic and huge issue in the industry. So, one of the other topics to talk about when it comes to restoration diversifying is that construction is also changing. There are things happening in Florida and California, for example, to make structures more resilient so that they are fireproof or hurricane proof or whatever that may be. And I'm sure the same goes for roofing, that new roofing techniques are going to hopefully prevent hail damage from happening or be less prevalent. So, what are you seeing in that space? And what do you kind of predict as what is the industry going to look like as some structures become more resilient to these storms and these weather events? What do you kind of think is going to happen from there? That's a big question. Sorry.
That's a big question. It's a
We can
good
go we can go way outside of the realm. Like one of the immediate
one.
ones is in the UK, they were testing self-healing asphalt for fixing potholes. Did you guys hear about that?
Mhm.
No.
I did. I saw something on that. Pretty wild.
Wow. I'm gonna have to go Google
So
this later.
so so at what point can a hail hit on a shingle be self-healing? Right. So maybe that's way out of bounds for the question because that might be
No.
too far into the future, but maybe someday that could happen.
Stuff
Uh,
advances so fast.
but then if you just focus on today, there's different techniques. So like we talked about Louisville as an example, or the Marshall fires. So Colorado is enforcing that, where in order for you to rebuild, I said Colorado, right? Enforcing it, where you have to have new resilient materials that can support and handle prevention for fire at that point. Uh, we've seen it with Hurricane Milton in certain cases where building codes were enforced, where there was less damage to those buildings relative to others that hadn't had the code upgrades. And then you also have municipalities that are chasing changes in their infrastructure. So in Houston, as an example, there's new changes where they have to double the size of the diameter, if you will, of the PVC drainage pipe. And
Oh.
so we're hearing about that in earnings calls as an example,
Hmm.
where there's a company that's going to benefit from that by about 15% top line. So these little nuances kind of paint a picture for a lot of the activity that does change the profile of risk in certain communities. So that's just kind of at a high level of maybe some of the things that are going to happen. That if you're a restorer, there's probably going to be less work to do in the future in some geographies, but it's going to take a long time. We have an aging infrastructure at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah. A long time. Dave, anything you want to add to that one?
Well, only that even for coverages, I mentioned earlier, even for coverages, insurers are starting to require certain physical attributes on the property. I mentioned my sister who lives in California on the backside of the Ortega Pass. And for her, she had to clear out all of her vegetation within 8 feet surrounding her property because of where she lives, because of the heightened fire risk. And she would not be covered by any insurance carriers until she had that cleared and had evidence from an inspector coming out and validating and verifying that that was actually all cleared from around her property. Spent a bunch of money removing a bunch of shrubs, removing trees, just to get coverage. I mean, California certainly with the wildfires that there's massive amounts of sensitivity. There was just a discussion with some claims executives or some executives for an insurance carrier that I read this morning. I shared with Aaron. that was pretty wild, where they were saying, if we can't raise rates in California, we just can't cover it anymore. It's getting that crazy, because of the amount of expense that something like the wildfires we just had go through California. That expense, billions of dollars in a relatively small amount of properties, but just by virtue of the expense of those properties, the locations, um, the cost to rebuild, it's just gotten out of control. If they can't raise rates in order to cover some of those things, they can't continue to do business in California. We're seeing that across the board.
That you bring up a good point though, Dave, because I started thinking about, as you were speaking about that, average deductible amounts and whether restorers are consistently capturing the deductible in the cases when it's appropriate to do so. It's kind of interesting as you start to see some of those things play out in terms of what's coverage, what's not coverage, or not covered, and then some of the different paths that companies are taking to have more affordable policies. Sometimes you're seeing that with the higher deductibles. You're seeing that with like roof depreciation schedules, as an example, and then just complete pullouts altogether of certain geographies. So it's getting pretty interesting in terms of certain areas. And then you have that compounded issue with the population growth and changing seasonality with weather, with anomalies. It's a pretty tough thing to predict, I think, for a lot of companies.
Yeah. Are you seeing other areas? We talk a lot about California and Florida as far as coverages go and being difficult. Are you seeing other areas being impacted by, carriers thinking this area is getting harder and harder to insure, rates are going up, those kind of things?
That's
I
a
think
good
there's
question.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's some level of that in Texas. I think there's some concern around Texas, right?
Yeah, I've
Just
heard
with
so.
just with the amount of hail and how often they're replacing roofs. I mean, there's certainly sensitivity that we've heard around Texas, replacing roofs versus repairing roofs. How often am I replacing roofs in Texas? Lots of questions about that. I don't know that carriers are necessarily ready to pull out. I don't know, Aaron, what you think there, but I think there is certainly sensitivity on the way that they're spending,
That makes sense.
on those things.
But I think it also, I don't have the data on it, but it'd be really interesting to look at rate filings with the DOI
Oh yeah.
and see if you can find any new anomalies where somebody's identified a risk or an exposure that they want to be able to price to. It'd be interesting to watch and see where you have an influx, if you will, of rate filings. So we probably have the data within Verisk. I just had to talk to a counterpart in underwriting to get the info on that.
That's fair. Okay. All right. So let's talk about 2025. I've maybe avoided this part of the conversation for a minute, but how's 2025 looking so far?
Do we need any kind of a disclaimer before we respond on this? Because the three of us could be in trouble at some point.
I mean, everything can turn around and this is just numbers. Don't shoot the messenger and
Okay, fair. Thank you for the disclaimer.
data's data, numbers are numbers.
Yeah. So from our view, and Dave, you can probably jump into this a little bit more. Numbers for the first 2 months are a little bit lower than what we saw last year.
Yeah. It certainly has been a much quieter year at the front, and that includes the fires, right? I mean, we had a fair amount of claims come from the fires, but the reality is, compared to 2024, we are below, and we're probably, I don't know, Aaron, 15% below last year at the same time, which there are probably restorers out there that are feeling a little bit of that pain. I certainly think that the folks in California are probably pretty dang busy, but the folks outside of California, and Southern California specifically, but beyond that, it's been a pretty quiet year up until this point. That said, there's a lot of potential out there, potential activity looking forward. But before we get there, I don't know, Aaron, is there anything else you want to talk about there?
Well, I was going to ask you a question related to, so one of the areas of our business is the real estate owned, where it's kind of a function, if you will, of the macro economy of the number of homes that are in foreclosure, right, Dave?
Okay.
You've been in that business for quite a while. Is there, if you take that and you look at the average deductible size increasing? Do some of those what would otherwise be classified as nuisance claims get weeded out?
Oh,
And
yeah.
does that change that dynamic? And then if you see people that are afraid of filing a claim for low value damages, do you also see that impacting the numbers that would otherwise go through program work? So it's a hypothesis, but I do believe that those would be factors that would contribute to lower claim volumes and people worried about their rates going up because rates have already gone up. What was the last percentage just on average? It was pretty significant over 2024, right?
Yeah, we've seen it's an interesting thought, Aaron. And the truth of the matter is, especially in certain locations, so Florida and California are two examples of that, where there's significant sensitivity of getting dropped, right? So I don't want to file a claim in especially for a claim that's only $2, $3, $4,000 because I'm afraid I'm going to get dropped. Not unlike you'd see on the auto side where somebody's gotten into 4 different accidents within a year period, and they're like, you know what, I'm just going to pay this one out of pocket because I don't want my rate to go up, right? Because I'm going to end up paying for this anyway. There's some sensitivity around that, and I know there's a number of folks that we're seeing. We've seen generally the severity of claim go up. Now, there's part of that is inflation, part of that is there's a lot of different things, but there's also this nuance to Aaron's point where people are filing less often with those low value claims where they're like, okay, so yeah, I lost my ring and I don't want to file a claim for that, a contents claim because, it is what it is or whatever. Right.
Yep.
And so I think there is a renewed sensitivity around kind of that getting dropped from their policy due to inconsequential claim.
Yep.
Quote unquote inconsequential.
Or having their premium go up.
Or having their premium.
Yeah. And thank goodness you can't get a speeding ticket with homeowners insurance.
Aaron
last week.
Fine. Everything's fine. Yeah.
Everything's fine. Yes.
Everything's fine. Okay, so hopefully things will pick up in 2025. So what else can you offer us any kind of outlook on 2025? Some light predictions, whatever it may be looking ahead for the year.
So so I think so first, and we're going to get into some weather nerdology here. So get ready, buckle up, guys. But so this year is a neutral ENSO year, and what ENSO is El Nino Southern Oscillation. So that's there's a term, there's a weather term right there, and what that means, neutral, means that El Nino, La Nina are neutral. So we're not in an El Nino year, we're not in a La Nina year, we're just kind of in a neutral year. What's interesting about that is that actually typically does increase the potential for hurricane activity. It really does. Interestingly enough, and it does a little bit increase for that severe convective storm as well. And there's a reason for that because La Nina brings in cooler air, El Nino brings in warmer air. We have an interesting scenario off the coast of the Atlantic where we've got still warm waters. There's still warm waters, certainly, but we're not seeing that easterly airflow. So we're not probably, and this is kind of, again, we're modeling out here in 2025, but we're not seeing as much of that Saharan dust. We're not expecting to see as much of that Saharan dust come into effect where, like we talked about last time, Michelle, there's that absorption, right? So that dust will actually absorb the moisture, which slows the formation of storms off the Atlantic. We won't likely see that this year. And there's a lot of different models that are predicting this. Florida State University is highlighting this specifically, but we've got a number of different models that are kind of showing we may not see that same Saharan dust moving from east to west like we did last year, which slowed some of that formation, which is why we saw so much formation going on in the Gulf. This year, we may actually see it. We may actually see more formation coming out of the Atlantic. So something that we're watching very closely. Typically, the Florida Peninsula actually sees a 23% higher landfall probability in neutral Enzo years compared to La Nina years, which is what we kind of saw last year, was more La Nina happening. And so that's interesting and something to keep our eyes out, watching out for, certainly, because there's a heightened probability. Now,
Mhm.
what that turns into, we don't know yet. And right now, the models are showing about average. So about what we saw last year is what the expectations are this year right now. And I think a lot of the modelers are a little gun shy, if I'm honest.
I
Um,
mean, last year was interesting, so
Last year was interesting, and so I feel like there's some people want to be a little bit more conservative after last year because they were blowing things up. 22 some odd storms.
yes.
It's going to be this crazy year, and that did not come to fruition. And a lot of people were preparing for that. There was a lot of, whether that was from material demand, and they were pushing a lot more stuff down into the Florida area in case, or Texas area in case. People run their businesses based on this data, and the fact that while we did have some later storms hit in Florida, not near what the expectation was. So anyway, right now it's looking like about average. Let's just say that, maybe slightly above average depending on the model, but generally we're right about average.
So the same with variation.
The same with variation.
So it'll be about the same with some
Yeah, with
variation
a
by
little bit of tweak.
geography,
Yeah,
maybe some anomalies here or there, up or down.
that's right. That's exactly right. When it comes to severe convective storm, we are seeing a little bit, again, another year where we're expecting about average in severe convective storm activity, though we are seeing a shift of that activity go more eastern. And what that means is that, as we create more resilient properties within that kind of hail belt, as we move further, whether we move east or west, some of those properties, there's a new set of properties that get impacted that are not resilient and have
Mhm.
no expectation of that, just like we saw the hurricanes
Yep.
last year with Helene, where it went up into the Carolinas.
Yeah.
We expect to see some of that, where a lot of properties, they're not thinking about replacing their roofs or things like that, and they may have 30, 40-year-old roofs that are just not ready for it and get leaking and different things like that. So we are expecting kind of a move to more of the eastern side of Texas, more eastern Oklahoma, and so on, as we look at the Great Plains. So that is something to keep your eye watching out for. But again, more or less typical activity is what is being predicted right now. Again, still very early in the
Yep.
season. People are still, models are still being refined and built. But I think today, if I were asked with certainty, I would say I would be more on the side of, yeah, it's probably going to be about average compared to other years.
So, Dave, one of the things you said was you anticipate it moving more towards the east. Do you look at that as kind of an expansion or an actual move of like a given swath?
Hmm.
Right. So from Minneapolis down to Houston, right? That's kind of like your hail and wind belt right there.
Right.
Mhm.
Do you look at that expanding and changing, overall surface area or actual movement, or maybe even both
I think it's
potentially?
it's a great question, Aaron. I think it's actually going to be a little bit of both. I think given some of the changes in agriculture, some of the changes in the way that, and again,
Mhm.
agriculture is a big part of this too, right? You have these big open fields, you have a lot of moisture in the air from watering of these fields and things like that. Like that fundamentally does change some climate activity. I think it'll be a little bit of both. I think you'll see a little bit of shift, but I also think you'll see an expansion as well. Now, is the expansion going to equate the shift? I don't know, but I think you are going to see a little bit of both actually happen.
Okay. Michelle, I have a question for you, if I may.
Okay.
You can cut this out if you need to. Um,
I'm here
so
for it, hopefully.
one of the things we continue to hear about from restorers is the challenge associated with payments, right? And I think you did a really, really nice job from through a survey with know-how.
Yep. State of the industry. Yep.
Yep. Do you anticipate any changes there, or do you feel like that's a continuation of an issue that uh, maybe perhaps TPAs can lean into? I think we had a pretty good discussion around that at Elevate.
Yep.
I'm just curious if you're seeing any headwinds or tailwinds on that front that are going to help support restorers.
That's a great question. I hear a lot of companies saying, if you have your systems and processes in place, especially, there are, people always kind of talk poorly about, not always talk poorly about program work, but a lot of our stores are now pushing for, if you can excel on program work, you're going to have the systems and processes in place that you need. That documentation is so good because you have so many requirements on programs that if you can mirror that across all of your claims and all of your documents, by the time you submit it to get paid, it should be kind of foolproof. So I think there's a push in the industry to continue to hone in on really good documentation that's going to hopefully help contractors get paid faster. I don't honestly know if it's going to get better. I hope that through using different tools that are out there now, whether it's 360 documentation or using other tools like that, or like scrubbing through using AI tools that kind of scrub through your estimates, that, I know there are things even in Xactimate that you can use, like actionable or whatever that is. So there's lots of things that you can use to make sure that the stuff that you're submitting is foolproof. So I think the more restorers can lean into those tools to make sure that the stuff that they're submitting is really strong, I think that that is something that will help move the needle. I know that, there's stuff gets nitpicked, right? And so the more consistency contractors can find and what's getting put on invoices, I think that that will help. But I don't know if it's going to shift or not. I do think some of it is TPA related, and there's always conversations of, well, this TPA pays really fast and we have no problems. This TPA pays really slow and they're way behind. I think there's more and more conversation about how this is a cash heavy business, and you probably shouldn't start a restoration company if you're not going to have the funds to, keep to pay for things up front. You have to have cash in your business. But that's a good question. I hope it's going to get better. I know that the RA did their cost of doing business report, which also is hopefully going to help contractors have a little bit more of that ammo to say, no, this really is our margins. No, this really is how long it's taking to get paid. No, I'm not alone in these struggles. So hopefully the needle will start to move. Maybe with Mark Springer in that new carrier advocate position with the RIA, I think that that could really help restorers as well. So I think everybody wants to move the needle. I don't think anybody's out to get restorers, and I don't think the restorers are out to get the carrier either. I just think it's a really difficult situation, and the dynamics of the industry in the last few years have just kind of snowballed.
Yeah.
So I don't know if
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I didn't mean for me to interview you. So
it's fine.
It's just
I don't know if I really
continues.
answered the question, but that was the best insight I think I have at the moment.
I think it's great. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anything that either of you want to add before we wrap it up? No?
Go, Michelle.
Yeah. Yep. No, just
I appreciate the question coming back on me. Thank you. I like being part of the conversation sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you and the industry, and we're here to serve.
Awesome.
Well, thank you. I think
ahead.
Dave is.
Nope, I totally agree.
Well, thank you for the update. And hopefully the next time we do this, you're going to come in with stats that say claims are up. We're blowing it out of the water. We've overcome all the, we're going to hope for the best, even though that's not great for homeowners and property owners, but that's such is the industry we're in.
We will report the facts.
Yes. Okay. That's fair. All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
For more Restoration Today and the latest news, visit our website, cnrmagazine.com, and find the latest episodes of the Restoration Today podcast on your favorite podcasting platform.